you know, when Basia signed up for this, or I signed her up for this some time ago, and she tried to get out of it, saying, "Oh, I've lost all my pictures," and
Yeah.
So she's just going to wing it tonight, and see what she. Oh, did you get that? So I'm just going to. We all want the birds. That's the reason we're here, and so Basia's going to give you the birds. And this is, I didn't even plan that one. Adventures in Birding with Basia!
Yay!
Hello? Yes. Oh, it works. Okay, yes. Hi everyone. I'm Basia, and since most people have trouble pronouncing my last name, it's Kruszewska, which is a Polish name. And if you were hoping this is the polka night, I won't be doing polka tonight. If you were confused that this is the other presentation, so no polka here tonight. And my talk is about birds and birding. Some of it will be about my own adventures in birding, and some will be about some of the things that I love about birding and about birds, so it's kind of a mixture. And I know we sometimes refer to these talks as TED Talks, and I think it'd be more appropriate to maybe be the Odd Talks or the Odyssey Talks. So first of all, who am I? I'll tell you what I'm not, which is an ornithologist. That's a person who studies birds for a living or a career. So I am not an ornithologist. I just love birds. They make me happy. I'm in my happy place when I'm walking around in a botanical garden where there are birds flying around and doing their thing, and that's what makes me happy. So I may not be able to answer your detailed questions about bird kidneys or something like that, but I can tell you about why I love birds. I do have a background in biology, though. I have a PhD in neurobiology, which is the study of the brain and the nervous system. But my work in that really had very little to do with birds. I got my PhD at the University of Texas in Austin, and then did postdoctoral work in New Zealand and also in Rochester, New York. And the 7 years that I spent working on my PhD, this is what I did. I studied these two cells. And I'm not exaggerating. The entire 7 years, those are the two cells that I studied. And these are cells from a crayfish nerve cord, and they're light-sensitive cells. And this is a micrograph that I did many years ago. I filled the cells with a dye called Lucifer Yellow to visualize what the cell looked like, and we were trying to figure out what the chemical basis of this was, how light transduction was taking place. So clearly this has nothing to do with birding. And then after being in science for a number of years, I completely turned my life around, or upside down, I should say, upside down. And I went back to school and got more degrees and ended up working for an IT company called CGI, doing consulting in instructional design and change management, in training and in communication. And I did that up until just before, when I retired, just before COVID. I still think of myself as a scientist at heart for the most part, even though I did spend many years doing work that was not related to neurobiology, but it's still kind of my first love. So people often ask me, what got you started on birding? And I think I was born a birder, to tell you the truth, because I was born in Poland, and we lived there until I was 9, and moved to America with my family when I was 9. And I have very few clear memories of Poland, but the one that I have a very clear memory of is storks. There were lots of storks in the village where my grandparents lived. So it was a very small village with houses, and there were storks everywhere in the chimneys and on the roofs and all that. And for some reason, I've always retained that memory in my head of these storks. This picture was not taken when I was young. This is what I looked like when I was beginning my my birding career. So this is probably about, I don't know, 6 years old. I went back to Poland later, and there were no longer any storks in my grandparents' village, but there was a giant stork sanctuary, and that's where those were taken. So I consider that to be what's known in birding as a spark bird, and that's a bird that it's a species that sort of triggers you into a lifelong passion about a certain bird. So I think the stork is my spark bird. And then I don't know how many of you remember this. Yeah. So this is a book that came out in the 1970s. It was called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and it was about the seagull who strives to fly higher and be better. And for some reason, I was just mesmerized by this book. I loved this book. I've looked at it since with adult eyes, and not so sure about the narrative anymore, about how I feel about it, but the idea of this seagull that is doing all these flying maneuvers and everything up in the air just intrigued me a lot. And the book is, depending on who you ask, one critic has said this book has been widely regarded as a masterpiece of modern literature, but if you ask Roger Ebert, film critic, he said the book was so banal that it had to be sold to adults because kids would have seen right through it. So, but like I said, the narrative aside, I just loved this. For some reason, I fell in love with this idea of this seagull. So I think that was probably the continuation of my spark bird. I love birding, but I also love to take bird pictures. So not all birders take photographs. But I do. I'm definitely a clicker, and many of you have seen me with this thing, which weighs about 6 pounds. And when I go walking around in town, it often draws a lot of attention, especially with kids. So these children were very much intrigued by my big camera and insisted on trying it out. And I especially like this little girl here on this side who's pretending to hold the camera. She's doing this, she's mimicking me. And also others who mimic me in other ways. So this was a little boy in Tanzania who followed me around going like this. So it's definitely a way to connect with people, with kids, but and adults as well. I get comments about that camera very frequently. So at least once a week, since I've been here on the Odyssey, I get from someone a picture that says, "What is this bird? I saw this bird outside on the deck." Or, "I saw a black and white bird with brown wings. Do you have any idea what it is?" And while I'm always game to try to find out, sometimes that description may not be enough. So one of the first things I'm going to tell you is how you can do your own bird identification. And the two things that I use for my bird identification are these two. One is called Merlin Bird ID, and the other is called eBird. So Merlin Bird ID is an app, and what it does is it allows you to identify birds by sound, or by picture, or by a description. And I most often do ID by photo. So I shoot first and then I ID later. I want to capture it on film, and then I'll run it through the app and figure out what the ID is. This is a free app, so anyone can download it. And if you are interested in birds and interested in identifying them, I would highly recommend that you get that. And then in conjunction with that is eBird, which is a website, a database, where there are thousands of pictures and descriptions of birds. And it's been very useful for novice birders as well as for professional birders. And you can also maintain what's called a life list. Anybody here have a life list? I know Harley does, yeah. So a life list is basically a list of all the bird species that you've seen in your life. And you do that by keeping checklists of all your trips. And I'm going to show you, okay, so this is the Merlin ID. This is what it looks like if you had this on your cell phone. And you can, the thing in the middle, you can just start recording. and it will pick up the sound and will attempt to identify it, or you can run it through a photo database and try to record it that way. Now for the pictures, it has virtually all known species, pictures of all the species. For the audio, for the sounds, it does not yet. It has a much smaller number, so it's not quite as easy to identify. I will occasionally send them my audio to add to the database, to confirm and to add to the database, so we're hoping to improve that database. So, but this is the main thing that will help you identify birds. And that thing on the right is what it looks like when you've recorded something. So this was taken during a camping trip where I was in my tent. It was early in the morning, and I heard all kinds of birds twittering, very early in the morning. And I just turned it on and immediately told me that there were those 8 species in the, or whatever number.
Wow.
So it's kind of a cool way to, and because not all of them are in the audio database, it's not as reliable as the one for using pictures, but what it does is gives you an idea of what you should look for. Okay, so if it tells me there's a meadowlark in there somewhere, I kind of know what I'm looking for, so it helps with that. And then this is what the eBird one looks like. This is my profile. It's a website. You create a profile, and it gives you, it keeps track of everything that you're doing with birds. So I'm just going to take you to the to my site quickly. Okay, this is what my site looks like. So here's my life list. I've seen 1,174 species for a long time. This is how many checklists I've submitted, complete checklists and total checklists. And a checklist is just basically, you have to do a new checklist for every location. So I've been to 600 locations around the world. It also accepts your photos, so you can put photos in for the ones that you like, and it's a nice way to keep track of that. And it was very helpful for me because I recently had a hard drive crash where I kept all my photos, including my bird photos, but fortunately my best photos were in eBird, so I didn't lose everything completely. And the other nice thing about this is it tells you where, the location where you've been birding. So for example, this shows all the places where I've recorded some birds, where I've documented birds. And the red ones are, of course, the ones that I've seen the most. And you can drill down. So you can say, okay, in the US, these are all the places where I've seen birds. And obviously New York is the brightest because that's where I lived for many years. So I saw a lot of birds there. So it's a very useful tool. So I would also recommend that this is another place for aspiring birders to go. Okay. So I said that I saw 1,100 something birds, which sounds like a lot, except that there are 11,000 species of birds. So I'm really only about 1/10 of the way there. And we can't say exactly how many species of birds there are, because there's some, I wouldn't say controversy, but disagreement about exactly how to classify birds. So normally you would say species, which are those that can interbreed, okay? But it's not always as clear-cut as it seems. So for example, this kind of crow, carrion crow, and the hooded crow are considered separate species, but they do sometimes have hybrids. They interbreed and make hybrid babies. And so really, should they be separate species? Should that hybrid be a separate species? So this is where some of the ambiguity comes in. And also because more recently, DNA technology is allowing to do paternity tests on birds. And things are not as straightforward as they were when the initial classification was done. So, but somewhere around 11,000. I know you don't like that word, but there is some fluidity to bird taxonomy. And in birding, and I guess in other kinds of taxonomy, there's some tension between what's known as the lumpers and the splitters. So the lumpers favor putting things in broad categories, and they talk about the similarities of all the birds in that category, whereas the splitters have the opposite categorization thing, where they prefer fine distinctions and splitting things into smaller and smaller groups. And so there's always a bit of an argument going on, as much as birders can argue, about exactly how things should be classified. Now here in our own community, we also have lumpers and splitters. So we have a general chat, and we have the voyage, and that's split up into excursions, and that's split up into afternoon excursions. And I pretty much think very quick, any day now we're going to have 1 p.m. excursions and 2 p.m. excursions. So this is kind of the same idea with lumpers and splitters, that there's no absolute consensus on how many species there are. Okay, so if you're going to be a birder or be in the company of birders, you should know some of the language, the birding slang. So here are some common terms that are used for birders. A dude is someone who's very casual about their birding. Not an expert in birding ID, but maybe they like to go out and take pictures or something like that. And I know there's a couple dudes in here that I'm familiar with. A birder is keen. They like birds. They probably are very interested in what the species is and how to classify them, but they're not really obsessive about it. A twitcher, on the other hand, is someone who twitches if they hear a bird a mile away, or they immediately rush out or will travel very long distances in order to find a specific bird. And a lister is someone who is very worried about their life list. So if you have 1,100 species, they will do anything to get 1,101 species. And then finally, these are the snobs of the birding world. So if a dude tells them they saw a mockingbird, they'll say, "Nah, you didn't see a mockingbird. That was something else." They're going to make fun of them. Finally, there are non-birders that we just don't like. Those are the ones who bring their dogs into bird sanctuaries and scare all the birds off. Those are the yabos. So don't be a yabo, okay? Don't bring a dog into a bird sanctuary. The other thing with the birder and twitcher terminology is that this is really, the twitcher terminology is really more of a UK terminology. In fact, I didn't know I was a twitcher until probably about 1.5 years ago, when someone, I think it might have been someone from our group, called me one. And I said, what? But apparently that is what birders are called in the UK. And I've learned to love the word, so now I call myself a twitcher. But in the US, it's not as widely used. In fact, sometimes it's kind of a negative connotation to be a twitcher. And then finally, sometimes in the US we're also called chasers, because we're always chasing birds. I learned that you have to be a little careful with that. We were in Belfast doing introductions with this community, and I said to the folks sitting with me, I said, yeah, I'm a birder and I'm going to be chasing birds in every country. And this gentleman, is he here? I don't know if he's here. An Aussie says, yeah, I will too. He didn't look like a birder. So I got excited. I thought I'd have a birding buddy, but it turns out that there's a difference in what that means. So before you tell somebody you're a chaser or you're chasing birds, you might want to consider where they're coming from. Is Steve Clarkey here? I'm going to out him. I couldn't tell if he's here. No, he's not here. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Yes, please, thank you. Okay, so when I go birding, when I say I'm going birding, I sometimes have non-birders say, oh, I want to go with you. I think it'll be fun to go with you. And I'm always a little wary of that, not because I don't want them to enjoy birding, but because a lot of people have not had the experience of what it feels like to be out in the field looking for birds. And they're assuming they're going to see this. And it's true that all these birds are birds that I saw on field trips, on birding trips, okay? But remember, I put in 600 checklists over 20 years. So these are from 20 years worth. So what happens with folks who are not birders, if I say, there's a golden-tailed sapphire hummingbird, okay, this is what they're thinking they're going to see. But what they actually see is this. Or if they're lucky, they see this. So after a couple of those, they start to get disillusioned. If I say, look at the giant petrels, this is what they're actually seeing. And then my favorite bird, which is the cock of the rock, which is a beautiful bright red bird. And if you're lucky, you see a tiny little sliver of red in the branches. So it's once you've been on a couple birding trips, you realize that that's what's going to happen, and that every once in a while you will get a beautiful bird that you can take a picture of. But there's a lot of this, okay, where you're hard pressed to identify, or you have to wait. And I think this is where it comes from sometimes, from Snow White walking through the forest and all the birds are running up to her and tugging at her skirts. But the main thing with being on a birding trip is that you have to be patient. So this is me in Ecuador, and I sat on that stump for 45 minutes, no exaggeration, waiting for this little bird to show her face. This bird is called Shakira. The locals call her Shakira. And sometimes I will stand there and wait for a bird for an hour. And non-birders, I can just feel them. They're like, okay, Basia, that bird that flew here 15 minutes ago, you know, he's not coming back, never coming back, let it go, you know. And I've sat there for an hour waiting to get the right shot or for the bird to reappear. So those of you who are non-birders, you're welcome to join a birding trip, but I just want to set the expectations, okay, that it's going to be a lot of waiting, and then you'll get that glorious shot that you want. So I've already told you about what a life list is, and then a lifer. I know many of you have heard me say that. After we do some sort of an excursion, you'll ask, you know, how was it? And I'll say, oh, I got 4 lifers. And so a lifer is a bird that you haven't seen before that you can add to your life list. So that's always an exciting day. And when I go on birding field trips, if I can get at least 1 lifer added to my list, I'm happy. So that's a very common term. A few other terms that you might want to be familiar with. One is called butterbutt. So if somebody says, check out the butterbutt, they're not talking to you or to me. Okay, they're talking about this little bird which has a yellow rumped warbler. Another word that's commonly used is trash bird, and that's something that's ubiquitous or irritating or unremarkable, like pigeon, or maybe a sparrow, or some seagulls, or something like that. Those are, sometimes people call those trash birds. But trash bird is also in the eye of the beholder, because I lived in Juneau for a while, and while I squealed every time I saw a bald eagle sitting on a lamppost, you know, in downtown Juneau, I could feel the locals rolling their eyes and saying, she's never seen a bald eagle before. So it's not any one particular species. It's just a bird that you've grown very used to, and to you it's nothing special. SOB, anybody know what that is? Not that. So, spouse of birder. So I think there's a term in sport, widow, football widow, or baseball widow, or something like that, some widow. So this is kind of similar. This is like when you're married or your partner is a birder and you're really not. So that's called an SOB. And then these are called bins. Just makes it easier. Rather than binoculars, you could call them bins. LBJs are what's known as little brown jobs. And those are all these birds that nobody can ever identify. They're tiny little brown birds, and they're really hard to identify sometimes. So you can just say, yeah, I saw 12 little brown jobs. You can't enter them into your eBird list, but that's what they're referred to. And then there's this one called Not a Bird. Now this is a picture that I took. I took probably 12 pictures of this. And I see a lot of not a birds. And it's basically something that you think is a bird, but it's really not. And I thought I was photographing this, which is an owl. That is a real bird in there. But I stood there clicking away for a minute thinking, oh wow, it's an owl, it's an owl. And then as I got out the binoculars and looked at it more closely, no, it was not an owl. It was just a piece of wood that looked like an owl. So that's not a bird. And this is a warbler neck. It's an occupational hazard of birding. And you do spend hours on some field trips like this, just staring, waiting for that bird to show up. So that's called warbler neck. So why do I call myself a twitcher? I told you that I embrace the term, and a twitcher is someone who will travel long distances and, you know, twitches when they hear a bird. So I'm going to tell you one of my birding tales, and it has to do with the Canary Islands. And I know many of you who were in Belfast, we ended up going to the Canary Islands for several weeks. So this is Tenerife, one of the islands. And most people know that they're not named after the Canaries. Okay, the islands are not named after the Canaries. They're named after dogs. But the birds are named after the islands because there were lots of birds on those islands, yellow birds. So they were called canaries. And I had researched that there were quite a few canaries still in the Canary Islands. Over 100,000. I think it was something like 80 pairs. So I got it in my head that I wanted to see a canary on the Canary Islands, no matter what. And so for days, weeks, I scoured Canary Islands for a canary. And is Katrina here? Yes. So this is Katrina helping me scour Canary Islands. There was a group of us in the hotel. And we spent a full day at this place trying to find them. And then I spent many weeks afterwards going everywhere that I could think of, every green space. And it got to a point where I thought, okay, this is going to be my nemesis bird. That's another term. It's a bird that you just can't find no matter how many times you try. And I started saying, I'm not boarding the ship until I find a canary in the Canary Islands. And what was that? I jinxed it, yes. And I knew I was really in trouble when I overheard some of my other shipmates planning to go to a pet store and get a caged canary and release that to get me out of the Canary, yes, Katrina, to get me out of the Canary Islands. But fortunately, I got an alert from eBird. It's a database, so everybody puts their data in, saying that someone on the island spotted a canary. And I was just overjoyed. And eBird gives you the latitude and the longitude, the coordinates. And so this is what I got. And it was the equivalent of this trail, some kind of a trail that was there. Now, the only problem was, this is where the canary was, and this is where I was. So this is, I think, around 80 kilometers, because I think that whole island is only about 80 kilometers or so. And I didn't have a car. But I was, darn it, if I was gonna miss a canary. So I Googled it and looked up buses, and it turned out that I could take 3 buses that would take me probably 2.5 hours. And I maybe had a chance of finding the canary. So that's what I did. First thing in the morning, I got on that bus, drove all the way out from there to that trail, spent several hours looking for the canaries there. And guess what? It wasn't just one canary, it was actually a canary family. And I got some fabulous bird pictures. So then I could finally board the ship, and that's when we finally left Belfast. Yeah. So that's one of my birding tales. I'm going to tell you 1 or 2 more. So my second one is, I was driving cross country, and I was somewhere in between Idaho and Utah. Anybody here from Idaho or Utah? Is there, what is this area like? Not much there? Yeah. It's pretty, it's not New York City. Let's put it that way. So I was driving, and it was at a rural road, and I was pretty much the only car there. And some bird caught my eye, so I pulled over and got my I pulled over, got out of the car, got my binoculars out, and was looking at the bird. And out of the corner of my eye, I was like seeing this big old pickup truck stop by, and he's like cruising back and forth. And I'm very comfortable traveling solo, as many of you know. I don't, in fact, I prefer traveling solo most of the time. So I'm not. I don't worry about it too much, but when I see a big pickup truck pulling up and me by myself on this farmer's field, I stay vigilant, and I start worrying about it. And so my plan B is always that this could be used as a weapon. So I always, when I'm carrying it around, I feel like I'm carrying around some kind of a, machine gun or something, And so I figure, well, if I have a really good aim, I might be able to break their nose or something. if they really tried. So, I'm looking at this guy, and he finally does stop. He pulls out in front of my car and saunters over to me, and he says, "Do you know about a burrowing owl?" I said, "Burrowing owl? No." And I'm like immediately relieved that this guy's not gonna, isn't a serial murderer or something. And he pulls out a little bird book out of his pocket. It turns out that he's a birder, a very avid birder. And he starts to tell me that there's this farmer's field like a few miles down the road that has a burrowing owl, and I really should go see it. And he proceeds to give me very explicit directions on how to get there, which were like, go to the barbed wire fence and then turn left at the pond, and then, and all I can think of, okay, I'm not going to be killed here. This is not my day, so I'm not paying so much attention to his directions. And then he pulls away, and then I finish looking at the initial bird that I pulled over for, and I'm getting back in the car, and I see him coming back to me. He pulls up in front of me again, and he says, "I just went by there, and the burrowing owl is sitting there right now. Follow me." And he peels off. And I'm not a rule breaker when it comes to driving. I'm probably the only person you will ever know who got pulled over for driving too slowly. It's not a joke. I really did get pulled over for driving too slowly once, because if I go 2 miles above the limit, I'm afraid somebody's going to pull me over. So, but he's going like 70 in a 35 mile zone. So I'm definitely out of my comfort zone. But it's a burrowing owl. It's a lifer. So I step on it and I follow him, and sure enough, a couple minutes later, he pulls up in front of this farmer's field and very patiently guides me to where it is. And it's a good thing he did, because I would have never spotted this guy, because he's completely camouflaged. He was like deep down in the ground, just poking his head out at first. And he spent something like 15 minutes with me, helping me find this little owl. So birders are really good people. And then this is my last birding tale. And this is just a picture from Google, but it just illustrates what I'm about to tell you. So in Rochester, I belonged to a birding club, and we would go out on field trips, and especially during migration, and look at birds. And during COVID, normally we would carpool, like get 2 or 3 cars together. But this was during COVID, and nobody wanted to carpool, so we decided to do a caravan, convoy of cars. And so there was about 8 of us, and we were driving, and our leader was in the front, and sometimes we would pull over to look at birds or something. And we were driving along, and all of a sudden a cop car comes up and pulls over our leader. And the cop says, "Do you know you're holding up a long line of cars behind you?" And then he looks over, and every one of us starts pulling up behind the leader. So he thought he was doing us a big favor, let these cars go by, and instead we're all pulling up in front of him. So, see, birding can be dangerous too. You can get in trouble with it. Okay, so that's enough about my birding tales. Now I want to spend a few minutes talking about a couple of the things that really intrigue me about bird life. Okay. And those include migration, something called murmurations, and then mating rituals. And yes, there are other things that don't begin with M, but I just like the alliteration. So, okay, bird migration. So everybody knows that birds migrate. Okay, that means they're going from one region to the next, usually during spring and autumn, and it's a north-south migration. And roughly about half of the species migrate. Depending on how you define migration, how big the distance, but about half the species. So that equates to about billions of birds. And the questions that come up with this are, why do they do it? How do they know where to go? And how is their little body capable of doing this? And if you look at the routes they take, this is what's known as migration flyways. And it's the routes some of these birds take. There are many others. This is just an example. So you can see that some of them go over land, some of them go along the coast, and then others, that red line, goes completely over the ocean the entire time. The longest migration, and that's the red line, is by the Arctic tern. That's what that little animal looks like. And it's about 25,000 miles. So every year they go 25,000 miles and then they go 25,000 miles back. So no small thing. The longest non-stop migration is by this bird known as the bar-tailed godwit. And this guy was tagged in Alaska in the Arctic and then flew non-stop for 11 days until he reached Tasmania. Non-stop for 11 days. That's his tag. I don't know if you can see that, but the birds are tagged on their legs with a number so they can be located. So he went from the Arctic to Tasmania. That's the route he took. This is Alaska up there and then Tasmania down below. Some 7,000 or 8,000 miles. That's 750 miles per day for 10 or 11 days. They do not stop to eat or drink or rest. Probably not to pee either, because I'm thinking they probably conserve water. So it's just an amazing, amazing thing that they're able to do. I'll talk a little more about how it's possible. So the first question that I had up there was, why do they do it? A couple of reasons. One is food. Okay, where is their food available? With changes in seasons, there's going to be differences in food sources, insects, seeds, fish, all of that. So they go in search of where that food is available. Also breeding grounds, specific areas where they can nest and care for their young. And also like snowbirds going to Florida, maybe to avoid some of the very harsh winter conditions. So the next big question is, how do they do it? There have been experiments done on a number of other species, but a lot of them have been done on 2 or 3 species. And in the ones that has been explicitly studied, they find that they may double in weight before they go off on their journey. So they put on a lot of fat. Some of their digestive organs shrink because they're not using it for that flight for those 11 days. They lose most of that or half of that body weight during this journey. And they have an unusually aerodynamic body, so it's ideal for kind of a compromise between airspeed and drag. And they're very efficient at converting food into fuel. So that's some of the things that allow them to do that. Animals can sleep while they drive. So, for example, frigate birds. I know all of you have seen frigate birds because we see them in the ports all the time. They're those giant, magnificent, beautiful birds with the forked tails. They can sleep while they fly. They do what's called unihemispheric sleep. One side of the brain sleeps while the other one remains vigilant. And EEG tracking has shown that they can take little power naps, like 10 seconds or so, and end up sleeping for maybe an hour a day while flying over the ocean. So, and they can stay aloft, they can stay up that way for months because they don't have to land anywhere to sleep. And with frigate birds specifically, it's a good thing because they cannot swim. Their feathers are not waterproof. So if they do get in the water accidentally, that does not end well. In fact, these 2 pictures are from a sanctuary, a frigate bird sanctuary that I went to on this trip. I think it was Barbuda. And this was my guide. We were in this little boat. And while we were driving around, he spotted this guy just flat out on the water struggling and, just looked like he wasn't ever going to make it up in the air. And he picked him up out of the water and lifted him back up in the sky because they're not, once their wings get wet, they're not able to fly. And they, the other way they survive is by stealing food from other birds. So other birds who are in flight, they'll harass them until they drop their food and then go for it. So that's a couple of the reasons for how they are able to maintain those long flights. And then the third question is, okay, how do they know where to go? Okay, we're talking from one end of the earth to the other, and they don't have GPS, or do they? So there are a number of reasons, or a number of ways that are thought how they do it. There is no one definitive answer for that, and it's probably a combination of things. And there are a lot of studies being done on it. But you can't say really that it's this or that. One of the possibilities or probabilities is that there is a genetic predisposition to migration, okay? Because The young often do not migrate with their parents. Sometimes the parents leave weeks ahead, and then the young continue to develop, and then they go off on their own. So they're not just following their parents for all those kilometers. So there's something in some genetic thing in there that triggers them to migration. Another thing that has been discussed or has been proposed is that it has something to do with the Earth's magnetic field, so that they may be able to estimate their latitude, where they're going, based on the strength of the magnetic field. There's also a lot of discussion about whether this is really true, and some of the experiments that have been done were that a bird that normally goes south for the winter, if you take them in a car, put them in a car and take them to the southern hemisphere and release them, they will head toward the equator and not toward the other pole. So that seems to contradict that theory. It's not, hasn't been completely debunked, but it's possible that it may be. Also, they probably use some celestial clues. So the sun, the stars, especially the North Star. One of the flyways that I showed you was for birds that go along the coast, North and South American coast. And so they may be using that as a landmark. They're looking at where the coast is to do that. Now, obviously, that won't work for all birds because those flyways were very different, but it might work for some of them. That was landmarks. And then sense of smell is probably important. In experiments where the sense of smell was blocked temporarily with a chemical, birds could still navigate over land, but they became very disoriented over the sea when flying over the sea. So they may have some sort of a olfactory map, so to speak, to help them with that. And part of it is also learned behavior. So after their first migration, they do fine-tune their route. So they're learning as they go. And they can get back to the same place, even if they are blown off course. They can sometimes make it back. And then this last one, this is the edge of my knowledge about quantum physics. And I would direct you to John Frim over there for any questions on this, because I'm going to read this explanation to you, but that's all I can do is read it. The radical pair effect, thought to be mediated by cryptochromes, which are light-sensitive proteins in the retina. When light strikes these molecules, it triggers the formation of electrons that are magnetically sensitive. The alignment of these radical spins is influenced by the Earth's magnetic field. So it's kind of similar to the magnetic part, but very different method, that we're talking about some proteins that are in the eye. And that this alignment, together with a chemical reaction, might be something that is going on here. This is a fairly new theory. I mean, new, not yesterday, but in the last decade or so. And this I really do not understand very much, other than that it is being considered. And yeah, like I said, if you have any questions about this.
That's perfect.
You agree? Okay. We'll go with that one. It's all quantum based, like everything, right? Okay, so it's probably a combination of these things, and it's also probably different depending on which bird it is. If we're talking about the ones that are flying over the ocean versus the ones that are flying over land, and where they're going and how far they're going. The second marvel that really absolutely fascinates me is what's known as murmurations. And has anybody here seen murmurations? Mm-hmm. Oh, a lot of you have. Okay, excellent. So yeah, murmurations are this aerial display where birds will just go forming really interesting shapes and swirling and swooping and doing all that. And it's absolutely fascinating to watch. And I'm going to show you, this is not my video, but let's see. But I love watching this. This is what it looks like. So these are different flocks, so to speak, of birds. And this goes on for 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, with the shapes forming and reforming and more birds joining. And it's just fascinating to watch and wonder how they're able to navigate. These are little birds. They're not using GPS. Nobody's bumping into each other, and they're forming these beautiful beautiful formations. Okay. So that's what a murmuration looks like. Oops. So how are they able to do that? Early ornithologists thought it was telepathy. So this is from 1931. He said, madness in the sky could only arise through collective telepathy. The birds must think collectively all at the same time. Okay, I think this is pretty much not true. At least I don't know of any experiments that have shown that it to be true. But this is, I mean, it was so mesmerizing that I can see where people might think that that's the case. So it is mostly done with starlings, but there are other species who do it also. And there are many, as I'm not quite sure about this figure, but hundreds of thousands, depending on which, I was trying to Google the actual numbers, but so we're talking hundreds of thousands of them sometimes. Sometimes smaller, sometimes small groups join together into bigger groups. And the murmuration, the name is because of the sound their wings make when they're flapping together. The interesting thing about this, and that gives us a little bit of a clue about why they're doing this, is this. Usually it happens at dusk, just before they're bedding down for the night, and usually over grounds where they're going to be sleeping that night, so communal roosting grounds. And it's often triggered by a predator, so a falcon or a hawk or something like that. So that has led people to think that it may be a sort of protective mechanism, that making these big, scary shapes might keep predators at bay. Now, I don't know that anyone has ever created an experiment that shows that for sure, but it's one of the theories that it's a way to protect against predators. Now, how do they do this? It doesn't seem to be a leader. Okay, unlike if you ever watch Canada geese flying, there's usually like a V shape, and one is in the front. Okay, these guys don't have that kind of a leader. There's no shape and no plan. Your favorite word again? Fluidity of motion. And there's been a lot of computer modeling done on this, taking pictures and looking what each bird is doing. And some of the computer simulations have determined that each bird keeps tabs on 7 of its neighbors, not any more than that. So they're only concerned about what's going on with those 7 closest neighbors. And birds do see faster than we do, so they're able to process that information a lot faster than we are. So what seems mesmerizing for us humans may not be quite as spectacular for them, because that is the way they operate. And from those computational models, it was determined that kind of 3 rules, so to speak, and I don't know much about computational models, but the 3 rules that they could figure out from this is that when a bird is in some particular area, the things that they're thinking about is, okay, in this area, you're always going to move toward the next thing. Excuse me. In this other area called the repulsion zone, don't go into his lane, otherwise you're going to get in trouble. You're going to crash. And then angular alignment. So you got to kind of follow some bird that's one of those 7 birds next to you. So it's and like I said, this is all done with computational modeling at this point. And taking videos and watching how individual birds react to each other and the birds around them. So again, just like with migration, no definitive answer. We just know that they're doing it very well. Okay, the third. Okay, I gotta hurry up. The third marvel of birds is mating rituals. And this is a pair of American avocets that I photographed in Nevada. And the cartoon says, those bird watchers sure know how to spoil a romantic moment. And I did feel like a bit of a peeping Tom as I was watching them and photographing them. And the thing about bird mating is that they have very elaborate courtship. It's intense, it can take hours, it can take days. But the sex act itself is more like a hop on, hop off, literally. They do what's known as a cloacal kiss. Those of you who are new to Odyssey, pizza is a code word we use in WhatsApp when someone's getting too raunchy or sharing too much information. Other people will say pizza. So that's good information if you're on WhatsApp. It means stop that. And this is the kind of thing that would get pizza. So yeah, that act is very quick, very simple. But the mating part, the pre-sex things that go on, are the things that are interesting and take much longer. Are birds monogamous? The answer is yes and no. It used to be thought that 90% of birds were monogamous, but it's looking like that 90% is kind of misleading. The 90% refers to the fact that they're monogamous for one breeding season. It doesn't mean lifetime monogamy. What's known as serial monogamy is more like it, kind of like humans. And again, DNA analysis is showing that they're not often faithful to their partner, even the one that they're supposed to be building a nest and breeding with. So when DNA analysis is done, it's shown that they have a lot of out of wedlock babies. So that monogamy theory is, not completely true. So it's for different birds. So house wrens, for example, are monogamous for one nesting attempt. Songbirds from flamingos for a whole season. Robins, swallows, and doves maybe for several seasons. And then the ones that are true monogamy are things like albatross and petrel and swan and eagle. But those do seem to be the exception rather than the rule. And kids giving me the finger. Okay, so frigate birds are, two examples of their mating rituals. So magnificent frigate birds, I already mentioned, we see those a lot. And this is what they do when they're mating, when they're in their mating seasons. So if you see them up flying, the one on the right is a female and the one on the left is a male, and you can see a tiny little red thing there. And this is what the tiny little red thing really is. It's a giant balloon that they blow up. And they drum on it and they click on it, and it's all to attract females. And this was a spectacular scene, seeing hundreds of them. It was like, I felt like I was in Disneyland as they were all flying around in there. And that's all part of their mating cycle. And the second example is these guys, which is the flamingos in Kenya. And this group here in the foreground is known as the flamboyants. And there's a group of them that will start walking together, and they're literally just do this, like they walk from one end, do a U-turn, walk to the other end, and they do this for 15 minutes, 20, actually I watched them for more than a half hour, and they just kept doing this over and over and over again. And when the female is, so they're all trying to figure out who's going to mate with whom, and they apparently, when the female is ready, she goes off to the side, and they use some sort of a signaling with their wing flapping, for which male she's interested in, and then the male will go off with her. But to watch them is just really mesmerizing, and I regret that I didn't do a video at the time because it was really, okay, I'm gonna have to go quick now. Okay, bird naming. So whenever I say there's a booby out there, okay, somebody twitters. So just so you know, boobies do not refer to female anatomy. They come from the Spanish word bobo, which means stupid or foolish or clumsy, because they were originally thought to be stupid, foolish, and clumsy because they were not afraid of strangers and made themselves very vulnerable, and they were clumsy when they were landing or taking off. So that's where boobies come from. Another one is tit. That's another one that always makes people chuckle. There are elegant tits, and there are blue tits, and tit tyrants, and pendulum tits, and great tits. And again, it has nothing to do with female anatomy. Tit just means in Old English something that's small. So it's titmouse or titmose. And that's where that all came from. So you can stop giggling about the tit and the boobies. Now for the male anatomy, not to be outdone, there's dick sissel, and there's cock of the rock, and satanic nightjar. Again, nothing to do with male anatomy. This has to do with supposedly how he sounds, although I've heard them and I don't really think they sound like that. And the cock of the rock refers to, it's like in a rooster, the crown on his head. And bird names don't always match the bird. So this is a red-winged blackbird, no red wings. This is an indigo bunting. This is a Eurasian blackcap. Okay, the birders don't answer this. Any idea why? Yeah, so these are the female versions, and this is the males. So male does have a red wing on it, and the male is blue, and the Eurasian blackcap does have a black cap, but the females don't have a voice in their naming. Okay, people ask me, what birds do you want to see on this trip? So I looked ahead at some of the places where we will be stopping, and in Guatemala, what I'm looking for is this guy. It's called a resplendent quetzal. and he's absolutely gorgeous. And in birding terms, it's what's known as a crippler, because it's a beautiful bird that leaves you crippled with joy. This is my crippler bird. This is the one that I'm waiting for. In Alaska, I've seen a lot of bald eagles, but I've never seen a golden eagle, so I'll be looking for that. In Mexico, I'm hoping to see this little bird because it's the smallest bird of all the bird species, bumblebee hummingbird. In Japan, red-crowned crane. In China, this beautiful thing that looks like a toy, painted toy. And in Australia, is Fran here? Fran introduced me to this guy, which is called the bin chicken. And that's because it burrows around in garbage. So it intrigued me. So I'm making that my target bird. And in New Zealand, what was that?
You won't have to try too hard.
That's what I hear, yeah, you won't have to try too hard. And in New Zealand, it's going to be all about the penguins. There are 17 species of penguins in the world, and I've seen 10 of them so far. And the next 4 are in New Zealand and Australia. So those are the ones I'm going to be watching for when we get there. Okay, I don't think I have time to do that, right? I'm way over my time. Okay, so that's the end. And if there are any questions that you enjoyed. Any questions?
I have a question. You
Yes.
said you can add a bird to your list that you have not seen?
No, you can only add one if you have seen it. Seen it or heard it, yes.
No.
Yeah. Did I say that? If I did, I didn't. Yes.
There was something called a lister?
Oh, a lister is someone who just obsesses about their list. Yeah. So they're always trying to get more birds onto their list, onto their like list. Yes.
If you have several listers birding at the same time, can they share a list?
If they both. No, you're only allowed to put on your list what you've actually seen or heard.
During that birding episode.
Yeah. So sometimes when I go with a guide, the guide creates the checklist and distributes it to other people. And the assumption is that when you get the list and you didn't see that particular bird, you'll take it off your list. So that, yeah, you should only put down what you've seen or heard. So my final thing that I almost forgot to do is, there are wonderful, beautiful bird calls. And one of my personal things that I want to get better at is identifying by bird calls and also making bird calls. And I only know one so far. You guys want to hear it? Merlin identified that as a red jungle fowl. So I have a few more to learn. Thanks, everybody.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. So this ends the second speaker's corner for the day. There's another one on Monday, April 21st by yours truly. I will be doing environmental poetry that I wrote some 12-ish years ago on Earth Day Eve. How's that for a title? And I call it very cleverly environmental poetry. Earth Day week is celebrated, and Global Harmony here on the ship has pulled together about 4 days worth of activities, starting tomorrow, I guess. I'm going to say it started tonight because the 5:30 talk was about Hawaii calls, and it really did talk a lot about the culture and the environment, etc. of Hawaii. And then Basia introduced it to some birds, including a great call. There will be a fundraiser for trees in British Columbia. Oh, let's see. We have that donation box and it's overflowing. So Lino is going to pack that all up and take it to his church Sunday morning. And I'll be helping him if he can't get it all into his backpack. There's so much going on that we decided to actually put a calendar in the library hallway. So go check that out so you can find out when you can do the tree financial donation. Let's see, and carbon credits as well. We have a silent auction on the 22nd in the craft room from 10 to 7. We have some art, some paintings, some artwork, maybe some jewelry. I'm not sure the things. And if you have stuff you'd like to donate, we'll be glad to take that. My speaker's corner, and I've come up with a challenge that you're taking and making environmental actions to improve, lighten your step on the earth, and I'm giving you ideas of how you can do more of that, new ideas, like why don't you take a grocery bag with you when you're in town and pick up trash along the sidewalk and put it in a dumpster or something. But do be careful. Sometimes you can get in trouble with the police for doing that. It's their job, I don't know. But take public transportation more often. And there are a variety of charities we can donate. There's a cat and dog shelter in Ukraine you can donate to. May peace prevail on earth. A woman who's doing murals to help heal broken hearts and culture and stuff. Lahaina Rise, Maui Recovers, Tree Canada, the Living Pono Project. So there are a lot of things you can donate to help others live more peacefully and sustainably. And with that, I bid you good night. Daryl has his meet and greet going on in morning light, so if you're ready to party some more, go on down. Thanks for coming. See you